My name is Rich Girven. I'm the director of the Cyber and Intelligence Policy Center at RAND. If you want to know more, you can go to the INSA website and look up the bio. I'm not going to read anybody's bios here, but I'm honored to be joined by Sherry Van Sloun, who's the Deputy Chief Human Capital Officer at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, by Sweta Arbuckle, the Senior Human Resource Leader at Amazon Web Services, by Kristine Korva, the Principal at Deloitte Consulting, and Harry Coker, who's the Executive Director at the National Security Agency. And I have a few administrative announcements that I've been asked to go through. So questions, you should have found a card on your seat or on the seat next to you, or you can steal a card from somebody else if you want to. If you have questions for this panel, Future of the Workforce, this is the Future of the Workforce panel. If you think you're in a different panel, you should go ahead and head to it now. If you have a question, go ahead and fill it out early and hand it to one of the folks that will come up and down the aisle. So don't wait till the end. We're going to spend about 45 minutes having a conversation up here. I'll ask some questions, and then we'll shift to questions from the audience. Media will be present or may be present during this session, so keep that in mind when you ask your questions. Obviously, we're unclassified because we're in this convention center. So if we had come into this space, I don't know, about 20 years ago, there would have been more government and fewer industry. You all would have been sitting in the front 3 rows packed together, unless you were from CIA, in which case you would have been sitting in that back corner with a name tag that only had your first name and not your last name. So culture changes a little bit. What you're doing now is representing the workforce of the future. You're distributed, right? You're working from wherever you are, and you don't need to be in this close and connected community. So what we're going to talk about today is the workforce of the future, and we're talking about the intelligence community and the cleared industry, or the contractors who support and are integrated within the intelligence community. And before we get started, we should probably come to some agreement about what the future means. So in my mind, we're not talking about next year or 3 years, maybe not even 5 years from now, but probably more like 5 to 10 years, or better yet, let's say 5 to 12 years, because 12 years takes us to 2030, and then we have a grounding document, the National Intelligence Council's Global Trends document, that sort of defines what the mega trends are for us in the world in 2030, that we might be able to then think about workforce of the future in those terms. If you look back just 10 years ago, since we're going 12 years forward, the world was a little bit different, right? We didn't have Lyft and Uber, so transportation was a completely different thing than it is now. There were no iPads. Can you remember that time? There were no iPads. There was no 4G network. We didn't have that technology at all. There were a number of apps that didn't exist. There was no job called social media coordinator, because social media, although it had just started, it really wasn't something that you had to manage or even thought about managing. So in just 10 years, the world has changed a lot for us outside of the intelligence community and inside the intelligence community. So I'd like to ask the panelists to sort of put their thinking caps on, think about what the world is going to look like 12 years from now. And not just, gee, what changes with technology inside of the agencies or inside of the industries that we're working in, but what changes culturally. When we talked diversity 10 years ago, we were talking about ethnicity and skin color and gender. We needed to hire for diversity. But now, if you talk diversity today, you're talking about sexual orientation. You're talking about diversity of backgrounds. In the future, you're going to be talking about diversity of thought, diversity of ideas, diversity of things that we can't even think about right now because we're sort of set in the present. So I'm going to throw a couple questions out to get the conversation started, and hopefully our colleagues on the panel will discuss. I encourage you to debate here. We don't have to answer a question and then sit quietly while somebody else answers the question differently. It's good that we have a conversation. Let's spark some intellectual thinking here. So let's start with the simple one. I'll make it a... You don't believe me, do you? What skills for the future IC workforce do you imagine that we're going to need to train for people just coming into the intelligence community, just coming out of college or coming out of school to come into industry? What skills are we going to have to retool the workforce for so that we can retrain people who are mid-career already? And what skills do you think are going to be legacy skills that we have to hold on to forever, regardless of changes in culture or environment or technology? Would anybody like to tackle that first? Are we going to do volunteer, or am I going to like point and say?
I think my colleague to the right wants to start.
I think Harry wants to start. Exactly.
Actually, I was going to say ladies first, but I will start.
We'll change
so
it.
those skills going forward, something that's often overlooked today, and it'll still be needed 5 to 12 years from now, are soft skills, people skills. And I'm frankly delighted because when I was going through my educational process, we did not do a lot of teamwork in engineering. Those classes were, go home and do your homework and come back and report out the next day. Now, folks are working more in teams, developing that collaboration that goes across the traditional boundaries that some of us had set, but also learning to give and take. So I'll start there with the interpersonal skills. So much is done based on relationships. But the legacy skills also include critical thinking. The hard challenges won't go away regardless of the time frame. Today, tomorrow, 5 to 12 years, or further out. We have to have folks who can think logically and critically and objectively. Our dynamic set of challenges will not slow down either. We've got to be agile. So those are the types of skills. But in terms of, I'll go to technology-based skills now. Today and 5 to 12 years out, we have so much more information that is available. We do not have and will not have enough personnel to go through pages and pages of documents. We need to figure out how to handle that data. There are secrets in the data that we have to be able to uncover. So not just data scientists. We do need those experts, but we also need our entire workforce to be comfortable with technology. I can remember when I first was exposed to a word processor. I said, back off. I didn't even want to do a word processor because I couldn't control it all. I needed to get comfortable with that. So folks need to be comfortable with technology, and that includes those of us that need to be retooled. So that's just some of the top-level skills that we need to have.
What's interesting is I grew up with a computer, but if I go look at things like Snapchat now, I have to admit I don't understand it. I don't understand why we would do that instead of texting. And so while I agree technology, of course, is a really important thing, I think technology is moving so quickly that whatever you're going to learn today in school is potentially going to be outdated next year, even 2 years from now, let alone 12 years from now. I think what we're finding is there's a lot of technology that exists now every day that we never would have even dreamed of when, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And so I actually think one of the most important things is, like you said, to be really open to technology, but to be really focused on being willing to learn and learn quickly. We find that there's a lot of technical skill that we can actually teach people who might not have a huge technical acumen when they come and join us. But it's only if they're able to show that they have an ability to learn and be curious and are able to kind of digest information quickly and then be able to apply it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say a couple words that I jotted down. Agree totally on sort of the tech savvy. To your point, though, it's constantly evolving. So, but things like agility, being willing to sort of open to change. I think there's such a nebulous environment today with folks coming into the workforce. They don't know what they're going to be at. The job they were hired for could look very different 3 months after they join. Consumer is another word that I think about. The business that I'm in, the business that you're in, and everyone else on this panel, we have consumers. And people that we hire need to understand how our customers are going to be consuming information. So thinking about the best way for folks to consume, whether it's data or reports or otherwise, again, knowing that mobile and technology is advancing so quickly, having sort of a more global view on how folks will consume information is something else I think is critically important. The other thing that's a little bit on the softer side is sort of improvisation. I think so many times our staff and colleagues are asked to quickly talk about a topic or an idea, and being comfortable in front of a room sort of off the cuff is also something that we're investing in at Deloitte, in making sure that folks are comfortable at any given point improvising and communicating in a really effective way. So those are a couple things that I thought of.
So I would say everything you've said is absolutely right. The soft skills are going to continue to be important as we find a workforce that doesn't want to work independently in the future. It's going to be more of group interaction. We're going to post hard challenges and expect people to step up to the plate and to be a team, part of a team. So those are really important skills that aren't going to go away. We look today for those STEM skills, right? The engineering, the cyber, the data scientist. Foreign language even is something that's never going to go away as well, right? We're going to always need those linguists to understand, even if we have human language technology that kind of interprets the data, we're still going to need a linguist to kind of really understand that culturally. So those are skills that aren't going to go away either. At ODNI, we've done this, we've done a transformation recently, and we've looked at an initiative called the Right Trusted Agile Workforce. We call that RTWA. To be fancy. But it's really about the future of the workforce is going to be a mobile workforce, right? We have to be able to move in and out of government easily and into private sector and back in. It's not going to be a 30-year career that we see the future intelligence community workforce, right? They're going to be maybe temporary hires that come in for a couple of years, learn about the government, go back into industry, get that skill sharpened or a new skill, and then come back. So that's kind of the future of we see the workforce as being more mobile, more agile. I think you're exactly right, that global thought, being quickly to adapt to new ideas, to moving to different directions, those are really going to be critical as we move forward.
And I'll add, we talked about the need for agility. Today's workforce, my perspective is more outspoken than a lot of us grew up with. Not disrespectful, but not as respectful to a hierarchical org chart. And I think that's a good thing, that they feel comfortable enough to bring forward these ideas that people like me may not have done decades ago. So that's a good thing. But it has to be matched by folks in formal leadership and management positions being receptive to have those different ideas come forward, those collisions, those disruptions that we might think are out of character or out of line. As long as they're brought forward with the right objective, we need to be able to take a look at those and assess those ideas and welcome them continuously.
And also I think that's a really good point. In the past, I think government, the intelligence community, we had to see our people, right? We had to know where they were every day. They worked in the office. That is not the future that we see our workforce being, right? They're going to be all over the DC area, maybe out in Denver, maybe wherever they're going to be. We're not going to have to see our workforce in the future, and we have to get that through our heads, because I think a lot of that management piece, we have to accept that, and we have to embrace that. I think that's going to be a demand of the future workforce.
So this is a good segue. I'm going to pick on a theme that I just heard before we get off the skills. So I heard Harry say we have to figure out how to get comfortable with new technology. And Swetha said people have to be willing to learn new things. Kristine, you said you have to be open to change. And Sherry, you said that more and more will be working as teams in the future. And so as we develop apps and programs and algorithms that help us deal with all the big data that you talk about so that we can do big data analytics, you've got to get to that place where analysts trust the machine, that there's this analyst-machine interface. I wonder what will be required to change in our community to enable people working inside of the community, both in government and in industry, to more quickly accept, understand, utilize, be willing to accept those changes, take on those new technologies. And I'll give you a really mundane example. So I was in government for 35 years. I went to a private company. My first day there, the ergonomics officer came in. I never had one of those in government. In government, they said, there's your chair, if I was lucky, right? But the ergonomics officer measured me from floor to knee and from knee to hips and from hips to shoulders and set my chair to integrate with me, and then did the same thing with the desk and the keyboard and the computer so that I would be comfortable in my work environment. I wonder if there's a future where we have technology ergonomics officers that help our humans interact with technology in a different way. Or what do you see as being integral to allowing workforces to accept change?
So I think that's part of the discussion we had about part of our future workforce is in our workforce today, and we have to be able to retrain them to think exactly like that. That cultural shift to understanding and accepting technology and to be more adapt to learning, to be a data-enabled workforce, that's a big initiative within the IC as well. It's not just the future of AI, and that's separate. It's going to be part of what we do. There was a phrase that I believe the PD used recently was, AI is not going to take away our analysts. It's only going to make our analysts better. And so that interaction of how we get the analysts trained to work with technology, it's a big shift for the future, and we're already thinking about how we retrain those analysts today.
Yeah, I think I've spent the last 15 years supporting the Intel community, a bunch of different intel agencies from NSA and CIA and DIA, and I find, and most recently NGA, and I find it fascinating at how quickly and agile these agencies can be when there is a threat, and how they adopt the technology more quickly. And the threat could be obviously national security, foreign threat, but it can also be industry as the threat. I will use NGA as an example in Google, right? And sort of all the geoint that needs to occur. And there are now companies, right, that are moving faster than sometimes our government. And I have seen sort of big boulders moving much quicker than they probably have in the past because there has been this kind of threat. But there's, again, from where I sit, I think having the impetus for something something that occurs to really kind of shift the way an agency needs to fulfill its mission is something that seems to, help the workforce too. But big policy changes or big threats seem to certainly make that happen a lot faster. Personally, from where I have sat also, it's been less about the workforce adopting the technology, because I think, again, in our day-to-day lives, we have more advanced technology than we are sometimes seeing at work and in the office, to your point, on even the chairs. And so, again, I think sometimes the threat is the impetus for it, but sometimes, again, leadership needs to, again, buy-in needs to come from the top also, and making sure that the culture is also advancing as well to make sure that these things are adopted and put in place. So just my 2 cents on that.
I'll just add one point to that. It was the first time in 2017 we do exit surveys within the intelligence community when folks leave. And for the first time, one of the top 5 reasons was because the IT was not up to date enough, not current enough, capabilities weren't there, and they were frustrated. Wow. So that's really a key trigger to us to say, wow, we've got to really think about that differently. Yeah.
I think there's something you said that triggered a thought for me, that it's not necessarily just about the people necessarily, but the cultural element of the company or the organization. So like at Amazon, for example, we're structured in a way, our teams are set up in a way that allows for a lot more kind of decision-making to happen within teams that stay close to our customers, rather than having to go through really large layers of potentially bureaucratic kind of decision-making. So I think it allows the company to keep moving quickly, and that's sort of an idea of influencing the culture to allow us to keeping up with change in a more agile way.
Mm-hmm. And I'll add that so much of this has to do with the environment that we set from the top. I know yesterday there was a panel here, and the director of our Laboratory for Analytic Sciences, LAS, Mike Bender, was here. And LAS is a partnership that NSA has with academia and the private sector. Literally, it's on the campus of North Carolina State University. But the environment there is such that folks can work those partnerships that can't happen in certain government facilities, bring in staff, bring in faculty, to bring in those different types of perspectives that we traditionally would not have access to turn around technology much quicker than we would, absolutely paying attention to cybersecurity. But it's more than a test bed. It's a centerpiece for how we need to do business in the future. And what we need to do, though, is take back that creative environment that we have set up intentionally and be able to export that back to our headquarters shops. We've got folks down there who are able to do research on unclassified and classified materials right there with colleagues from around the campus and other academia. But that's the type of environment that we have to grow.
Great. So new technology skills, whatever they are, soft skills, critical thinking, being open to change, wanting innovative thinking, wanting people who are willing to learn, who are willing to improvise, who are willing to adapt. Say a little bit about how you are currently recruiting, how recruiting will change. How are you going to find these people that you need? What will be different in the future, or what needs to be different in the future?
I'll start. I had the privilege of attending a session from a former intelligence community leader, and he talked about how traditionally we select for promotion or hire for key jobs based on demonstrated performance and ability to learn and core values, with the primary emphasis being on demonstrated performance. His perspective, which I share, is that we need to rearrange that. If an individual's core values align with the organizational core values, a big plus there. If an individual has the willingness and ability to learn, that's another big plus. Demonstrated performance, it should be considered sometimes, but not all the time, as the paramount issue. So we need to be able to not just take risks on our people, as I used to say. We need to have faith in our people. So that's one thing we need to do, not be so traditional and defensive about how we select and hire folks. We also need to go out to places and meet the type of workforce we want for the future. And those places are online as well as in brick and mortar. At NSA, we leverage several platforms that are online, from Glassdoor to LinkedIn, Indeed, and others. So we want to meet people where they are. Right now we have over 200 centers for academic excellence that focus on information assurance, cybersecurity, and computer science that we are partnered with. So, having that partnership is key. Also, in today's environment that will exist well past that 5 to 12 year mark, cybersecurity is critical. So what we are trying to do is to dissuade folks from thinking that cybersecurity is just a national security issue. Certainly is a national security issue, but it goes to personal security as well. So we need to make young people and not so young people aware, number one, of cybersecurity. If you have an ATM, if you have a telephone, if you have a computer, you have a credit card, you do online banking or shopping, you need to be concerned about that. So make folks aware of it. Then we need to educate them on the implications of not having a good cybersecurity hygiene. After that awareness and education, they need to apply it. So we're literally going out to elementary schools, middle schools, and of course college programs, making sure that our potential applicant pool is as broad and diverse and capable as possible, starting at the young ages.
So you're going to kindergartens now to get 18-year-olds 12 years from now.
We're starting very early.
I'm going to pick up on a couple things you said. A lot of our clients, especially in the Intel community, ask us about sort of the evolution of how to recruit talent. And I think there's 2 or 3 things that we typically advise, and we even do ourselves as a firm. Cyber is a huge skill set right now that a lot of folks are looking to recruit, including ourselves. So there's a few things. You talked a little bit about community investment, whether that's colleges, schools, cities, universities, chambers of commerce, whatever it is, getting out into the community and partnering with those communities that seem to be attracting, whether it's even at the city level, attracting the kinds of people, whether, again, it's the Bay Area or otherwise, depending on what you're looking for. The other thing you talked about is sort of this idea of meeting your talent where they are. And what I mean by that is online. We're seeing a lot of organizations, including our own, sort of adopting whether it's gamification or crowdsourcing or other kinds of issues that we're throwing out into the ether to attract the talent exactly where they're living, which is online, right? And so we embrace that a lot. The other thing that we're doing a lot of is crowdsourcing, right? We'll throw a problem out there, and we'll see, again, how talent responds to that. alternative sort of talent models as well. Not everybody is going to be in your headquarters or in your, major campus, wherever that may be. And so embracing sort of this open source, unclassified environment where you can actually get a lot of work done, or maybe 80% of it done, and then bring it in-house to be completed. So those are a few other things that a lot of our clients, including and ourselves, are sort of embracing. Even online interviewing, right? There's lots of software that is out there that allows you to interview someone from their home, or even 24 hours a day, where they can complete different assessments or answer your questions, and then you can engage with them at a later time. So those are lots of things that we're doing and we're seeing our clients do as well.
Yeah, I think about how technology can help us even make better hiring decisions, and maybe even be predictive to be able to say, here are some qualities about someone's background, maybe from a resume, maybe from all the various pieces of data about a person that are available online, whether you incorporate things like their social media presence or not. There's a lot of information that's out there. So if you could take all those things and somehow use technology to predict whether that person's going to be a great fit for a certain kind of job, I think that would be amazing. There's definitely a lot of experimenting going on with that. We've seen other companies do it. We've been experimenting a little bit at Amazon with like MBA hiring, where you may have somebody, I'm in HR, right? A lot of MBAs don't necessarily go into business school to go into HR, but maybe amazing at it. And so if you could take even someone who never even knew they wanted to go into a career path in HR and say, look, you have all these amazing predictive qualities that make you high judgment, strong professional, come and consider it. I think that's how we're going to get really interesting. You mentioned diversity of thought. I think we're going to get really interesting diversity of thought in our hiring. The other thing, too, is, in my early part of my career at Amazon, I spent a year in executive recruiting, and I felt like my job was to be a little bit of an online stalker. And I'm not really joking, because the amount of LinkedIn and all the information that you have to look for about someone online, you're using all that information to kind of go and seek someone proactively, potentially, to say, hey, here's this amazing opportunity. Would you like to come and help us with it? And I think what I've seen in my experience is a lot of the people that I speak to who are maybe interested in a role with us didn't necessarily apply to a job. We kind of have to seek them out. And so I think that might be another difference too, is, as both of you were mentioning, going out to where the candidates are. I don't know that they're always actively going to be looking for jobs. So it's not necessarily going to be this kind of easy one-for-one.
I would just add, the intelligence community, about 2 years ago, just did our first ever one site for applying to IC jobs, and it's called IC Applicant Gateway. And that's the place where we ask students and even mid-career hires, anybody we go out and meet with and talk to, we send them to that site because it talks a lot about what the intelligence community does writ large. Every agency's on there to kind of give a flavor of what each element does. But it also has a job exploration tool for folks to kind of walk through, just like you're talking about, kind of I'm not even sure what job I would want or what I'd be good for, but this tool kind of helps you walk through the different occupations of the intelligence community, and it kind of spits out something for you to say, hey, you might be really good at these kinds of jobs, and then it'll list some applications you can apply to. So that was a big effort for the intelligence community to have a one-stop shop for folks who really want to work in the IC. So that's been really successful, and there's also the ability to do interviews online, so you can be at home, you can be across the country. That's been really successful as well. As far as reaching out to folks where they are, we do a lot of virtual interaction. We have a virtual career fair twice a year. We have, thousands and thousands of folks online talking to us about jobs in the IC. But we also do a lot of outreach personally, and we've really been focusing lately on getting into the educators, the school counselors at colleges, because those are the folks that kids go to seek out information, to seek out advice and guidance. So we've really been targeting the educators, sending folks down there to talk to the career counselors, and getting in with their school groups too. There's a lot of different committees and groups within the school. If you target those student groups, that's a really good place to talk more intimately with folks and talk about just a little bit more intimate interaction with the kids. So that's been really our focus. And then also, the elementary school, high schools, we have a lot of different partnerships with local high schools to get folks in for internships, to get a flavor for the IC. It's a really good way for folks to understand whether they are a good fit for us and if we think they're a good fit as well. And our rate for converting interns is I think it's like 84%. We do a great job of converting our interns if they want to work for the intelligence community. So.
The one thing I would just, I think everything that we're talking about here is really, I think, attractive to the workforce of the future. The one thing that I think still needs to be figured out is there is still a very high rate of losing people due to the clearance. I get a lot of heads shaking out here. Due to, obviously, the fallout from the clearances. And so the other thing for especially this community that we collectively, both industry and government, need to figure out is how to evolve, you know, that vetting process while still keeping the integrity of that process, right? We do that for a really important reason. But how do we speed that up? And again, getting people in early, interns converting, I mean, it's a great accelerator. But again, if you're literally coming in cold, you know, we still have candidates that are out there waiting upwards of a year. And you know you're going to lose those folks to different jobs. They may come back eventually, but that rate needs to get down. And that's something that, again, in this 5 to 10 year period needs to get fixed, in my opinion.
So the right trusted agile workforce I mentioned earlier, the trusted piece is exactly that. Yeah. We've got to figure out a way to reform the security clearance process to be more streamlined, and we've got to get creative on how we do this. Yeah. We can't not vet. There's too important. We do this for a reason. But there's got to be different ways and different approaches we can take to streamline that process. That's a really important point. Mm-hmm.
And I Roger up for what Kristine and Sherry both just said about the security process, but also want to vector back to what Sherry mentioned on the IC Applicant Gateway. What's so neat about that is that's a collaborative effort across multiple IC agencies to streamline that process. You know, we're working hard to make it more efficient, but it's a great step. And I want to focus on the collaboration because that's another area. We don't need to compete against each other for this talent pool. It's about defending the nation. And frankly, for me, that can be done in the public sector and the private sector and academia. Some folks may say it's heresy, but it's a partnership, especially when we look at cybersecurity. We need cybersecurity professionals, the public sector and the private sector, in the name of national security. So we have to do that. And along those lines, as I look at more than a handful of my former colleagues, where we grew up with the plan to be at an agency for 30 or 40 years, that's not the case nowadays. And we need to acknowledge that and accept it and embrace it. It's a good thing, frankly, when folks develop some expertise, go somewhere else, public sector or private sector, apply it, refine it, and they may want to come back. We need to be willing to have that conversation. And frankly, we have reached out to folks who have retired or resigned, and we will continue to do that. If they are interested in coming to the intelligence community for the right reasons, our arms will remain open.
Great.
And I think one point to that, just making that come back easier is something we really have to focus on too, right? Not making it so difficult to come back, right?
So in the future, INSA panel moderators will have a data scientist sitting next to them who can run the 50 cards with 3 questions each through data analytics. So this is awesome. You guys are great. So I'm going to attempt, we have more questions than we have minutes remaining, so I'm going to attempt to go through, and then maybe 1 or 2 people can take a shot at each one. And you've already covered some of this. So it's not just about clearances. The government hiring process, so I'm directing this to Harry and Sherry, the government hiring process is Byzantine, broken, archaic, takes more than 2 years, and government position descriptions change so quickly that by the time you've applied for one, it's no longer there and there's another one up there. So what are you doing, apart from security clearance process, separate set of 9 questions, what are you doing to fix the hiring and onboarding process for bringing people into government for the first time?
Okay.
I'll take it.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
I'll start this time, sorry. I would just say that we are looking at this extensively. As the security clearance process is being looked at, so is the HR hiring process. We've broken it down into kind of the steps of the process from when a person first puts their application in until they actually come on to duty. And we're breaking that down to try to figure out where we see the major holdup and the things that we can do to streamline that. Some of the efforts you'll see are things like an automated SF-86 form, which you used to do by paper, or that's going to be online. It's going to be accessible at home. You can do this online. And that's a lot quicker because a lot of times we face folks that send it in, it's wrong, and they have to send it back. That goes back 3 or 4 times, so there goes a month and a half, 2 months sometimes. So there are a lot of different steps along the way that we're trying to look at and examine and see how we can fix them. Some of the things on, posting a job, we'd love to get to the point where we're just posting occupations, right? And you apply to an occupation, and then when the vacancies come, that's when you have a pool of applicants ready to come in. Some of those things we're looking at on how we can do better at that instead of posting individual jobs. But there's a lot of effort, I can just say, going into looking at each step of the way and how we can streamline this. We have an intelligence community working group called the Applicant Flow Working Group, and they are looking at this very seriously. And we are part of that right trusted agile workforce. We owe a lot of answers on this. So I understand there are a lot of barriers and it seems like forever, but we really are taking it seriously to make it better.
And I'll just add a few things to that. Number one, we are frank and forthright about the challenges that we have on that. That's a challenge area that we're working hard. But we also want to make it more personal. I recall when I applied decades ago, I sent in a paper application and didn't hear back for a long, long time. So I never knew where I stood in the process until it was time to come in for a polygraph. We want to maintain constant contact with those individuals that have applied, since we're asking for their patience. Also, let them know where they are in the process, but they need to have a sponsor that's already in place outside of the recruitment department, so they know where their home base will be. Something that folks ought to consider, these internships, these co-ops that we have, those security processes can start early on. Literally, we have high school programs. So there's an opportunity to get one's foot in the door and then still have a full-time career. That should be considered. And then the internships, one key aspect of these internships, they are long-term interviews, as opposed to a 30-minute interview where you look at a piece of paper. The intern gets to interview us over a number of months, and likewise, we are interviewing the intern over a number of months. So take advantage of that opportunity. And then on the position descriptions being less stifling, I'll go back to what that former IC leader said. Core values, willingness, and ability to learn. Then we ought to be able to find a spot. Those are challenged areas, but we are working them hard.
Great. I'll ask the other half of some of these questions now in a different way. So there's a whole number of questions in here, and I apologize, I won't be able to ask everybody's questions, but there's a whole bunch of questions in here about on and off ramps and the ability for people in the future to move between government and between industry, or between government and industry, coming in and out. And I'd like to sort of recast the question. I'm the moderator, so I get to do that. What do you think about a future where we actually have what we have here at the table, where our industry is integrated inside of our government representatives, and that moving back and forth between industry and government is no different than going from being an analyst to a collector to a support person inside of government or inside of industry? In other words, it's just a change in what you do. It's not a different culture. It's not a huge divide. So say a little bit about the future and how you see it, and we'll start with Kristine.
Thank you. Well, we're already doing that today. Certainly at Deloitte, we have actually over the last year or so, we're bringing in active military, also government fellows, where we actually are, it's probably not as seamless as we'd hope it to be, from a culture standpoint. I mean, we're asking someone to do something for, 6 months to a year and then go back to where they were. But I think the learnings on both sides have been immense. We have, I think, again, as we work with, active military or reservists or veterans, I mean, the core values that you speak of, Deloitte obviously has our own, but it is immensely important in this sort of partnership that we've put together. Also witnessed it in government with some of our clients where we have executives and also other staffers that are doing rotations at either universities or in private industry. And I think, again, coming back with a very different lens on, challenges or areas that need evolution, and they bring back a whole, different or amplified skill set. So I see it happening already. Not only within my own organization, but in some of our sister organizations or competitors, and then also in government. Lots to do to continue to advance that, to make it more seamless. It's a little Herculean at this point to make those things happen, and there needs to be a lot of buy-in, but it's happening, and I think, again, will be incredibly valuable going forward. Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon actually has a lot of the similar programs like the military fellows, and I guess one of the other components that I personally have found really rewarding is when we're integrated with the customers, and so when we're getting to work alongside our IC customers to solve problems that we both need to solve, I think what we find is that there's a really interesting combination of having people who are mission connected and protecting national security coming from the IC perspective and industry trying to figure out how to help them innovate. I just think we're going to solve all these problems more quickly. And one of the other components that I found that we get a lot of benefit from is there's this judgment and long-term thinking that I've also noticed in a lot of our IC partners that is naturally a good culture fit with the way Amazon operates. And so there's a really good collaboration on those values as well.
If I could just make one comment. The intelligence community, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about it. The Joint Duty Program is a program that's been in place for about 10, 12 years now. And it's how the intelligence community employees move around the IC. Right? You do a joint duty for 2 years at another IC element, and you come back. You learn new skills, you bring those back. But we're trying to broaden that now as we think about doing externships with private industry. And so that joint duty program becomes more of a mobility program into federal government, into private industry, go out for 6 months, 2 years, whatever it is, and come back. So we're really thinking about that in terms of IC workforce and bringing industry into the IC. There are benefits to both sides, and we are in this together. So there are a lot of hurdles, you're right, to go through, right? Yep. There's counterintelligence, there's ethics, there's a lot of different things we have to work through, but that's critical to our future.
So let me change the subject a little so we can get through a few more of these. And it's not lost on the group here that the panel is a very diverse group, that there is much diversity here. So I'm going to twist some of these questions slightly. Some of the questions are asking, do we want a diverse workforce or do we want a most qualified workforce? And let's talk about diversity in the future. Right now, diversity is a goal. If you're a human capital officer, there's diversity that you're looking to get. But there's a reason why we have diversity. It's about having diversity of approach and diversity of background and diversity of thinking. So talk about a future where diversity and most qualified are the same thing. And it could be any of you.
Okay. I absolutely believe diversity and most qualified go together. We can sometimes talk about diversity. You talked about the more traditional or early on aspects of it, race, gender, sexual orientation. And we have evolved, still including those very important areas. But where I've seen us not take full advantage of diversity, and frankly, some of us run from that phrase, diversity and inclusion. Inclusion does not mean exclusion. It does not mean exclusion. It means making people welcome where we are. And that needs to happen. But we cannot just look at diversity on an individual basis. We have, some number of this type of person, some number of that type of person. It comes into play most effectively when you look at the diversity of a team, not just individuals. Diversity and inclusion and a sense of belonging brings together different skill sets that are multiplied when teams work together. There is data that supports senior executive teams that are more diverse have delivered more profit. Now, that's the private sector, but there is data that supports that. We need to figure out how we can more fully embrace diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Diversity, again, too often we get caught up in numbers games. That is insufficient. It's a misleading metric. Inclusion, making sure that we are all welcome. We perform better when we know we're in a welcoming environment. And then that sense of belonging really is recognition of an individual or a team's unique skill set and that it is being applied to the organization's mission. So when we have that in the right space, diversity, and just getting back to the question explicitly, diversity and most qualified are hand in glove. They are not necessarily distinct.
Thanks.
I couldn't say it any better. I mean, diversity has become less about compliance these days. I mean, let's be honest, there's still a lot of organizations where it's just a compliance game. But I think we're seeing most organizations now be very intentional about it. And the inclusion piece, again, it's now more about inclusion and that sense of belonging. And again, not only Deloitte, but many organizations have done a lot of research on what are the attributes of some of the best teams. And some of the best teams have, the elements of diversity and inclusion embedded in them along with purpose. And I think once everyone understands what their purpose is and what the greater purpose of anything that they're doing is, it becomes magic. So.
Yeah, I think it can become sort of this grown metric when, like you said, it's just about compliance. And I think another component around it is it's not just about one dimension anymore. And so, Harry kind of mentioned in the past it was only about female versus male, or it was only about a certain race. But if you look, even if you look at us, you have 3 women and 2 men, but we're all of individual backgrounds within that. And so there's this term intersectionality that's becoming kind of more prominent in the industry when thinking about diversity, where it's not just about a woman, but it's a woman with disabilities, a woman who's Black, a woman who's Indian, woman in tech, a woman in business. And so there's so many different ways to look at, I think, not just the people and the backgrounds of who we have on our teams. But the other thing, too, is you kind of mentioned, Richard, about it being like HR's job to look at this metric. I think you used it in a different way, but I think the other component is it can't just be the job of your central HR office to go sit there and crunch away diversity numbers in some corner. If the business teams or the leadership within the agencies isn't kind of embedding that into the way that they operate, we're not going to make any progress.
I would just add, look, it's the core of our business in the intelligence community to have diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of culture. We don't get better without that. So you're absolutely right. I mimic everything you said about diversity. It's no longer a numbers game. It is about getting the right people with the right backgrounds, best qualified. That's an intersection that will happen. Inclusion is a big issue. I think, sometimes you think about diversity and you have separate groups of diverse folks. Sometimes that doesn't create inclusion. Inclusion is about getting everyone's thoughts together, being accepted, having a safe environment. And, we talk about being in a safe environment. That drives innovation. If you're free to think, if you're free to fail, you drive innovation. And that's where we have to get in the future. So diversity plays a big part in the way we move forward. We continue to recruit for diversity. We have special programs for diversity. But it's really, we just can't think about it as one-dimensional anymore. That's exactly right. It's much bigger than that.
Let me switch back for just a minute. Earlier, I think both Kristine and Swetha talked about having military fellows in industry. Do you have industry fellows at NSA?
In research, we do have folks come in from industry.
So how do we get the same kind of diversity in terms of industry and government that we have in the other directions? So we seem to do very well at bringing government folks into industry to get them out of their government jobs for a year and then bring them back. How do we do the reverse? How do we bring in high-speed economists and technologists and, you name the background, bring them into government, let them do a JDA with a government job, and then go back to their own industry?
We're really trying to focus on that from the intelligence community standpoint. We know we need that. We don't have enough. And we do some of it when we talk about a specialized skill, a highly qualified expert. That's one of the ways we bring folks in to do a certain job for a certain time. It's a condensed time period. But we want to get more of that. I know NGA has a program called Engage that's really trying to target on industry folks to come in to do a special project if they think they can solve a problem. But there's not enough yet. We need to get better. And we are working towards that. But like I said earlier, there are a lot of, hurdles that you go through bringing folks in and out. And sometimes you just have to break down those barriers and get through them.
Who would like to say a little bit about retention strategies now and in the future? So there's about 7 cards here that touch upon how you get young people into the workforce, but more importantly, how you keep them there, how you retain them once they get to the IC and find out what working there is really like. So what's got to change to retain a vibrant workforce in the future?
I'm happy to start. So every year we do trends in HR, and interestingly enough, this year there are several trends around retention, rewards, career mobility, and so I guess my opinion, our firm's opinion, it's sort of multidimensional. It's not just about compensation, because I think if you asked anybody up here or any of you in the audience, many times it's more than the compensation, right? It's the experience, it's the people, it's the way you're challenged. And so although rewards and how you incentivize workforce seems to be a trend this year, and sort of looking at not only, again, the compensation and rewards, but it's the other things. It's sort of the career pathing and that mobility we talked about. Absolutely. And being able to sort of jump in and out of different environments. Technology, sort of the AI, robotics, making the work easier. Again, I use easier loosely in the sense of more efficient, so that the workforce can be more focused on sort of high-value, high-impact work versus very manual or labor-intensive activities that, again, maybe a program or a machine or some technology can assist with. The other thing that's been really interesting and a big trend we're seeing is around well-being, right? And it's about not only sort of mind, body, purpose, but again, some of the spiritual health, wellness activities that are offered, or the time that is allocated for some of those things, seems to be a huge spike in sort of, I don't want to just be all about work, right? I can be, in this day and age, we're always on. So how do I turn that off and keep that balance and be focused on my well-being? Not only, again, from a health standpoint, but quality of life and other things like that. So those are just sort of a few things that we're seeing beyond compensation.
I think some other components around career mobility is, you kind of mentioned this idea of the hierarchical work structure starting to shift a little bit. And I believe this is true for Deloitte, but at AWS, we're pretty flat in structure. We don't have a large number of levels. And so career movement or career growth doesn't necessarily mean promotion or moving up a level. It often is like if you were to draw kind of a tree, and then sometimes you're going this way for climbing it to get over here and then eventually up. And so I think being able to provide challenging opportunities that are keeping the workforce not bored but engaged on interesting problems, even if that means they kind of bounce over here to work on it and bounce back on this side. I personally think that once you're starting to, if something's getting too easy and you're starting to get bored, it's time to change. And I think with the number of opportunities available, at least internally, people have an ability to do that. The other thing that I think work-life, we hear this term of work-life balance a lot, but internally we actually try to think of it a little bit more like work-life harmony. And it is because when you're working in a global workforce, you may actually have to be on a call at 6 a.m. and at 10 o'clock at night, but it doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to create some harmony by being a little bit more flexible sort of in the middle of the day. And so I think, even when working with a lot of our IC partners, we found the same thing where some of you are working in these global industries where you need to kind of have that same flexibility, and I think that helps with retention as well.
I would just add on to what you all have said already. I think training and development is really huge, right? So it's not just being able to move around and being mobile. How do I get the latest cutting technology training? I want to stay current. I don't want to lag on my skills. I just talked to a recent hire, and he said, I've been here for 2 years. I was a technical, guru, and I already feel like my skills are declining. So you have to be able to keep those skills up to date, sending them out for the latest training, the latest externship to learn from a new technology from a new company. It's mobility and it's training. It's got to be that current technology, current edge that they're going to want to keep to stay on board. And, just kind of a funny point, but AWS allows dogs in their offices, and I think that's a huge retention point for work-life balance. So, hey, kudos to you.
It's true. All of my dogs come to work with me almost every day. It definitely helps with my retention.
Absolutely.
So how would they get a clearance? That would be difficult.
We're working on it.
But I'll add on the retention front, we have to continuously ask our folks, why? Why are you here? Why'd you come here? And when we take a look at that, for us, it goes back to that oath of office and whether we are still focused on supporting and defending the Constitution of the United States. I first took that oath when I was 17 years old, and I was just mumbling the words. All I knew it was my ticket out of Kansas. I've taken it 5 or so times since then, most recently last fall at Constitution Day with our workforce. And as I've matured, I have a much greater appreciation for that oath of office. So why? Why are we here? And if it's not to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, we have some work to do. So I'll start there. Then also, people want to be heard regardless of where they are. We ask our folks to tell us how to make NSA a better, more effective organization. We can't just solicit those ideas and receive them. We have to act on those that are feasible. And people are looking to see what action we take. Recently, we had the results of the IC climate survey, and our folks ought to be holding us accountable for taking action on those areas that aren't as green as they need to be. And that's fair. One of our core values is accountability, and accountability is not just folks in the suit and tie holding others accountable. It's got to go both ways. So those are good challenges we look forward to. Then I'll just add the environment, and it's more than a physical environment that we have to talk to. We talked about inclusivity, but I will add that we are taking a look at a fitness program to see how that can work at the National Security Agency. That's something that our folks have been asking for years, and we're taking a look at that. So that's just a small potential improvement on the workplace environment that we hope will have a positive impact on retention.
So before I go to this, let me riff off of something you said. So I think the IC has done a great job in the past 20 years at improving the number and cycle of workforce climate surveys they do to gather information about what's wrong. But there's generational change and there's technological change whereby when I want a car, it will be here in 2 minutes and the driver's name is. If I want to talk to somebody, I can text immediately. I could text right now, and if you're not paying attention, you won't know that that's what I'm doing. So there's this sort of immediate gratification. I fill out a climate workforce survey. The results don't come out for 2 months. We don't put together our process action teams for 6 months. And by the time there might be some change, I've probably already left the agency. So tell me how we get beyond just gathering information and turn the big data analytics capability of the IC to fixing problems.
So actually at Amazon, what we've been experimenting with over the last couple years or so is a daily question. And so while we have the annual surveys as well to focus on some of the big ideas, and you're right, it's hard to take immediate action. The moment you fill out that survey, there's a whole set of data gathering that has to happen and project teams to go work on things, right? And so with this daily question, the way it works is whenever I log on to my computer in the morning, I'll just get this quick pop-up that takes me, 5 seconds to sort of read and answer. And it's a question that is on a whole number of topics, but generally somewhere between engagement, how I feel about my manager, it's a whole set of topics. And managers have the ability to pull that information on a very frequent basis to be able to get a quick snapshot in time of what's going on the team. And we encourage managers to address those things on a regular basis. So hopefully you've had less time pass, right, since the feedback was delivered, and you can take more immediate action on whatever is happening. It's also good for reinforcing the positive things too, because it's not all negative, right? So a lot of times you can get a sense of what's going well on the team that we should continue to enhance, and that can be equally just as important.
So I'll take the hit on the climate survey taking so long. My office does that for the intelligence community. You're right, it takes too long because by the time it gets analyzed back to the leadership, an action plan gets put in place, it's almost time for the next survey. So you're right, that's something we need. I'll take that back to Dan for action. I love the daily question idea. I think that's fantastic. I'm going to take that back as well.
I think we all wrote it down when she
really
said
good.
it.
It's really good.
I think to echo that, we consistently recommend multiple channels to get feedback. I mean, the annual surveys, every organization does them, and it should just be one data point in a multifaceted way of engaging with your workforce, whether it's the pop-up question or it's live focus groups or it's dinners or it's more casual events. You should be sensing constantly with your workforce, and it should be almost subliminal in some ways with them. Some can be very intentional, like the pop-ups or the surveys, but other times it can be very informal. And that is, frankly, much more powerful and sometimes more candid than the surveys or the pop-up questions, because you're getting people sort of out of their element a little bit, and it's sort of a little under the radar. So I would encourage a sort of a multifaceted way of doing that.
Absolutely agree. Especially with the need for candid feedback.
Yeah.
Too often, we'll avoid feedback, and too often we will have less than candid feedback for various reasons. Those on the receiving end don't want their feelings hurt. Those on the giving end don't want to hurt the feelings in too many cases. And that hurts both individuals and the organizational mission. So we need to have that candid feedback. And we need to do it regularly. Sometimes we do go through survey fatigue. I've been pleased in that our participation rates have increased, but that's some of the feedback we get. Some folks have survey fatigue. And that's something we have to address because we do need to hear what's on the mind of our folks. And that is one opportunity to go on the record anonymously and then to hold us accountable. So we need to bump those participation rates up on the formal surveys and on the informal candid feedback as well.
So we're going to do one more round of questions. I'm going to make an admin note here. So the single biggest stack of questions all have to do with the slow security clearance process. Some of these I couldn't even read out loud because, wow. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But here's what I would say. The reason I'm not going to address these is because the afternoon session in this room is about trusted workforce, and all of the questions will be about this. So if you wrote one of the security clearance questions, I encourage you to come back in the afternoon and go to that briefing. This is a little bit more pragmatic. I'm going to start. It's almost a platform question for you, I bet you. It's going to, for the government side, it's going to be specific to what programs are out there, and maybe on the industry side, you can weigh in after. So there's a series of questions here that talk about whether or not there are local universities or national universities, or whether there are academic programs out there that are better suited for training cyber intelligence skills that provide the technical skills that the intelligence community and industry are looking for. Are we partnering with universities? I heard you mention earlier, Harry, the centers of academic excellence that we have, so you might want to remind people about those centers of cyber excellence, et cetera. So maybe talk a little bit about that. But the second level of that came through in a number of questions was high school kids today have a whole lot more opportunities for cyber education, for data science, for computing skills than they did when many of us went to school. What is government going to offer them? You're already down in kindergarten, so what are you going to offer them to lure them into government? And then I'll give that same question for industry to offer. How do you work with government, or how do you work to recruit those skilled youth as well?
For those high schoolers that are hacking potentially, that are focused on cybersecurity or other aspects of cyber, it's, there's a world full of tough challenges where they can put those skills to work. But we have to be more flexible because, as you noted, plenty of high schoolers or folks without the traditional college degrees have expertise that is directly applicable to our problem set. We need to convey that. Now, again, focus not so much on what you have done, but what you can learn and what you can apply. Maybe you don't have that sheepskin that folks have been traditionally looking for, but if you have that skill set, we need to have the conversation. So those high schoolers, we have intern programs that high schoolers can do, and that was new to me. High schoolers getting top secret security clearance, getting paid, doing work study while they're still in high school and working towards their degree. I don't know that it gets much better than that as a high schooler. Once we get them there, we need to give them that sense of the mission. Again, as a young person, I know it may be challenging to focus on what I'll call the right why, but we need to help them see what we consider the right why to be. Fully acknowledging 17, 18-year-olds, they've got some different things on their mind. So we have to do that. But we're so comfortable and confident and that our challenges that we work on every day would just be appealing, very appealing to those folks that are inclined to take up cybersecurity or the other side of that equation. So if we get them to apply, we're comfortable with our posture. Some of the programs, we have, again, the Centers for Academic Excellence, and that goes across the IC. I encourage folks to take a look at those. Some of the curricula have been shaped by the intelligence community to give those students more of the foundational education that's going to be applicable to what we're looking for. And then we have partnerships with a number of local schools that have specialties in cybersecurity. We just stood up what we call our signature schools, where we're highlighting those individual relationships. The first signature school that we had and have is University of Maryland, Baltimore County. They do an excellent job in educating folks for the problem set that NSA, private sector, and other public sector partners have.
Me? Or do you want Sherry to go first?
Sherry, would you like to go for government and then?
I'll just add something to what Harry said. So the Centers for Academic Excellence is an IC-wide program. We give out grants to universities that can build curriculum that feed national security students that want to come work in the intelligence community. And we focus those calls with annual calls for grants. And the calls are a little different each year. The last one that just went out was focused on STEM and cyber. So it just depends on the call, but we really work with underserved and rural schools that really want to have their kids come to national security for jobs. So this program has been in place for about 10 years now, and we really work to kind of focus on the curriculum and building curriculum there that can build students to be competitive for jobs in the IC. And I would just say all of the larger elements do have signature schools, like you mentioned, that they focus on their mission specific. So there are some differences on those signature schools, but you can look on their website, and I think Applicant Gateway talks about some of those as well, so if you take a look there.
So not too far off. I mean, again, I imagine just like Deloitte, Amazon has university relations schools where we are invested with the faculty, with the curriculum, with the university. We obviously have a very large cyber business as part of Deloitte as well, but one of the things that I think we also do that's we also are humble enough to know that we don't always have the right skills on staff, and so we actually pride ourselves on partnering really well too. So I think we do a lot of mentor-protege with small businesses that have a lot of skills that we may need in the delivery of our services. With the government as well, we also actually invest with some of our government clients in some of the programs that they have, again, in the spirit of getting resources to kind of cross boundaries. So, and again, I think we talked earlier about some of the other investments we're making in the community to help build out some of the skills.
Yeah, when thinking, I'm going to tackle that high school question a little bit, because you're right. AWS has partnerships with universities, and lately we've been partnering with universities to help create cloud-specific curriculum as well, since that's something that didn't necessarily exist in universities until a few years ago. For high school, what I always find interesting when meeting people who work in the IC industry is asking them how they got into it in the first place. Because I think while there is a group of people who've grown up with this, their families were potentially in this industry, maybe they've even grown up overseas because of what their parents did, there's also a group who kind of the only thing they understand about the IC is what they can gather from what's on the famous TV shows like Homeland or The Americans or Jack Ryan. And, you know, whether that's accurate or not, sometimes that's the only exposure. I think that there's this whole potentially very qualified set of upcoming talent. That's all they understand. And so I actually think that there's this ability to create this sense of purpose, which we've already talked about as being critical and motivating people, and especially in this coming workforce. But how to connect that sense of purpose with the strong mission connectedness that's really important with the IC. And I think if we're able to almost highlight and outline for students that are earlier and earlier in their studying and their academic life what opportunities are there and what the real experiences are like, that we may actually have a lot of great success in helping and motivate more of them to kind of consider this world. I personally only really got involved in anything related to the IC 3-4 years ago. It's just because in my background, it wasn't something that I was deeply involved in or had a lot of exposure to. And so I think we can do better in that education.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to ask you all to join me in thanking Sherry, Swetha, Kristine, and Harry for their candid comments today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules. I'd like to thank all of you. I've done this a number of times now. I don't think I've ever gotten 60-plus questions from a room before. So there's a lot of excellent questions in here that did not get answered, and I'm going to ask Chuck if there isn't some way that we can't post these somewhere and maybe have an online conversation about some of these things, because there's some really good thoughts in here that need to be addressed. 2 announcements. I already said if you have interest in the security clearance issues that came up, that you should come to this afternoon session on trusted workforce that Chuck will be moderating. And I'm to ask you now to please join us in the exhibit hall outside for a networking break and to look at some of the exhibits out there. So thanks again, colleagues. Thank you very much.